Hey guys, Keely Reason here, owner of Love Hope Adventure, where I talk about the marriage relationship, intimacy in marriage, and how you can go deeper with your spouse. And today I am talking about how can you fantasize about your husband or your wife. So if you're somebody who's thinking to yourself, I would really love to be able to spend some time just thinking about fantasy with my husband or my wife. Maybe that will help me feel more connected to them while they're not with me. Maybe it's a good way for me to feel more aroused before we have sex, but I just don't know where to start. So I think that the first place you start with any kind of fantasy is just basing it in real life, basing it upon your own experiences. See, a lot of people think that fantasy has to be something that's A, not attainable, or B, something that's really wild. It has to be super wild. Instead, focus on thinking to yourself, what is something that my husband or wife does that physically and sexually arouses me? And think about that. Get explicit with your thoughts. Think about, okay, if you love for your husband or wife to give you oral sex, think about that act. It's okay to think about your husband or wife pleasing you with their mouth. Now, there's other things you can think about. You can think about different positions that you like. You can think about different things that you enjoyed that they do that physically stimulate you that maybe isn't always sexual. Maybe you're like thinking to yourself, look, I can't even go straight into visualizing my husband or wife giving me oral sex right now, but maybe you can fantasize about something that they do that's sweet when you're standing in the kitchen and they come by and they tap your butt, or they hug you, or they embrace you. Don't think that all fantasies have to be completely explicit or even sexual. Sometimes your fantasies with your spouse can just start with the things they do that make you feel loved or cared for, and let those things evolve from there. Now, some other things that will really, really help you with your fantasy of your spouse is seeing what's happening during sex. There are times and positions and things that you may be doing in your sex life that you can't see. If you are in a missionary position and you're on the bottom and you guys, depending on your size or height difference or however you have sex, maybe you really can't even see what's happening. Open your eyes and just pay attention to what you can see, okay? If your husband or wife's face is right here, just look as much as you can. Look down wherever you can see, and then find ways to incorporate mirrors into your bedroom. I think that putting mirrors in your bedroom, or maybe you don't have the ability or wall space or whatever to put mirrors, but getting in front of mirrors during sexual times is the best way to give yourself images of you and your spouse being sexual for one another and to one another. This is a great place to start when you're trying to figure out, how do I fantasize about the things that my husband or wife does that I like? How do I do that? Give yourself actual images to draw from. So it's tough, right? It's tough if you are not a person who just is immediately visual, okay? So there are a lot of people, when you talk about something, say apple, they're going to think apple in their mind. Not everyone is like that, though. When somebody says apple, I don't necessarily think about what an apple looks like. So for me, somebody like me, fantasizing can be a lot more challenging because I don't naturally visualize everything someone's talking about. So for me, I have to have some visuals, and then I have to be very conscious about it. I have to say, okay, what does this look like? And let me actually picture this. So getting in front of a mirror when your husband or wife is having sex with you, physically pleasing you, whatever that looks like. Maybe you just go in your bathroom and you let your spouse stand behind you and you stand together naked and rub each other. Or maybe you find ways to put mirrors in your bedroom that don't look like, something that have your kids asking questions like, why is there a mirror on the ceiling? There's ways to put mirrors in your bedroom where people aren't like, okay, that's definitely a sex mirror. But at the end of the day, who the heck cares? who cares? I know this is kind of awkward for some people, but who cares, really? Like, if you are enjoying the sight of having sex with your spouse, good for you. That's such an intimate thing. So it's a great place to build intimacy, but also be this fuel for fantasy. For times when you are sitting without your spouse, maybe they're not home, maybe you're just trying to get yourself in the mood, whatever the reason, it will give you some visuals to think about. So then the other thing is, I've given you a couple of things to think about. Think about things you like that your spouse does that is physically pleasing to you. Get in front of a mirror so that you have some visuals to put with that. And then come up with time that you are going to spend fantasizing. So if you're not somebody who naturally has sexual desire, there's two types of responses generally. There's the response where when something sexual is happening, you respond. And then there's the person who has the spontaneous desire, which means nothing sexual is happening, but they're aroused. Their body is just aroused. And they don't necessarily need that additional fantasy, but maybe the fantasy comes from that, right? Because they're sexually aroused, they're already feeling excited, and their spouse isn't with them. So now they're thinking, oh, if my spouse was here, I would think about this, and we could do that, and we could do this. But the person who's the sexual responder, who needs something sexual actually happening to feel aroused, you're going to have to be a lot more intentional. You're going to have to say to yourself, okay, I want sex tonight. So let me just go upstairs or to my bedroom, wherever your bedroom is in your house, and let me just get ready for sex. And part of that is going to be me thinking about what my spouse is going to do with me when we have sex. Let me think about things we've done in the past that I've really enjoyed. Maybe you don't even do those things when you all get together, but it will help you feel more excited and more aroused. This can be a very good way for you to get yourself mentally ready and start the arousal process in your body. When you come into a sexual situation with your spouse already kind of aroused, it makes everything else they do with you feel better and more exciting. It can be a lot slower of a process and not quite as exciting or as arousing if you come into it and you had no desire whatsoever. Not to say you can't get there, but if you come into it already feeling aroused, that means that all of your, erogenous zones are going to be sensitive. So if you're a man, then you're already hard. If you're a woman, maybe you're already getting wet. There is already a sensation down in your genital area, whatever. And when your spouse starts stimulating that, or kissing you, or touching you, or whatever, you're already physically aroused and ready for that. And it can make sex feel so much greater from like the start. If you're somebody who's a sexual responder, you know that a lot of times you're going to start sex with your spouse and start that process, and you're not there. It doesn't feel like much. It doesn't feel like anything. Yeah, I enjoy it, but it's not super exciting until 10, 15 minutes into it, or until we're like really going at it, and now it feels great. But fantasy is a great way to help you get more aroused before you begin that sexual time. So you can set aside time to do that before you have sex. You can, I would definitely encourage you, if you are somebody who feels sexually aroused and then frustrated when that arousal cannot be met, maybe you save it for when you know you can have sex. But maybe you're somebody who feels like, okay, I just need to practice this and think about this. And if I think about sex this morning while my husband or wife isn't with me, or sometime during the day when they're not here, it's just going to build that desire. And later on when they are here, I'm going to be ready to pounce them. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself. What do you like the most? And if that's the case, then I say go someplace, be comfortable where you're not going to get disturbed. this is really important, okay? It can be super frustrating if you are like ingrained in sexual thought and then your kids need something, or your dogs start barking, or your phone is ringing. I say put away everything and all the distractions and make sure that you can go someplace, be alone, and be quiet to be left alone with your thoughts. Otherwise, it's just going to be serving as something that's frustrating to you because you're pulling yourself away from this thing that you're actually enjoying mentally to things that are not enjoying, and then it just kills it. It's like kind of the same thing if you were like starting to be sexual with your spouse and then, your kids start knocking on the door. That's very annoying. And it's very hard to get back in it once they do that, right? So like you have to overcome some of that mental barriers. So just try and have a time in the day, okay, when can I do this? Maybe it's before you go to sleep at night. Maybe you say, all right, this is the only time in my home when it's quiet. And no, I'm not really feeling like sex tonight, but I want to experiment with fantasizing. So while I'm drifting off to sleep, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to really think. Think about, what did my husband or wife do the last time we had sex that I liked? Is there a time when they did something I really enjoyed? And the reason why fantasy can be so helpful and so important to you is that when you're having sex with your spouse and they're asking you, what do you want me to do? If you have spent mental bandwidth thinking about what could feel good next in your mind, fantasy-wise, even when you're not together, it can really help you when you are together because it's got you aware. You're like thinking to yourself, okay, when you touch me like this, or at this pace, or at this way, or whatever, it feels good. And then when they start doing that, you can guide them and say, well, what's gonna feel good next? And it's got you really thinking from your times of thinking fantasy where your husband or wife is just doing exactly what you want them to do next. That is kind of the cool thing about fantasy, is that it's like, it's perfect. Okay, in a fantasy, even if it's something that can be done, even if it's a type of thing you've done before, it's still perfect. It's like in your mind, when they are doing this thing or this thing or this thing, it feels great the whole time and nothing's wrong. So that helps you when you are having sex to think to yourself, what's the next thing right now that would feel good? And you're actually thinking through that. So if you are somebody who wants to start trying to do more fantasy in your mind for your husband, towards your husband and wife, these are some ideas that will help you. Guys, thanks so much for joining me, and be sure to go to lovehoopadventure.com to read more of my blogs. Sign up for my newsletter, lovehoopadventure.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a free copy of my Sexy Truth or Dare game. These will be some great memories that you can build with your husband or wife. And if you have any questions, be sure to email me, Keelie, Keelie, at lovehoopadventure.com, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll talk with you later.